Today, 6 months from the midterms, the sputtering economy and an unpopular war, they're dragging down Donald Trump. And I suppose, arguably, the rest of us with him. In the last few hours, the fragile month-long ceasefire between Iran and the U.S. has started to teeter. The Pentagon says it shot down Iranian missiles and drones aimed at American military and commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, sinking 6 Iranian military boats. The U.S. says it will, quote, guide ships through the strait, and that 2 American ships have passed through. All this comes amid brutal new polling numbers for Trump on the war, the economy, and so much more. Today, a new sign the Trump White House knows things aren't looking so good. The Washington Post reporting White House lawyers are prepping staff to deal with oversight from a new Democratic Congress as they, quote, brace for the likelihood of significant Democratic victories in the November midterm elections. A Republican operative telling Politico the warning signs are flashing. In a new Washington Post ABC poll, more Americans disapprove of the job Trump is doing than at any point in his second term, 62%. It's not just overall job performance, where he's 25 points underwater. It's also cost of living, inflation, economy, taxes, immigration, the border, Iran. Trump has negative ratings on all of them. Gas prices are now approaching $4.50 per gallon, up almost $1.50 since the start of this war. Trump's Republican support also softening. His ratings among Republican-leaning independents have now reached a new low of 56%, as the Post notes. Among independents overall, he's at a staggering 25%. Trump trying to rally his base by going to a retirement community in Florida. You can see the banner right there behind him, Golden Age for your golden years. A sort of strange slogan to spotlight right now, inadvertently revealing a giant blind spot. As young voters and young parents couldn't be more clear right now. They're anxious about the job market. They're worried they don't have real wealth in the stock market. They're wondering if they're ever going to own their own homes, all while the president touts a golden age of tax cuts designed to benefit the wealthy few. But 15 months into his second term, Trump is still trying to place the blame for all these problems on the Democrats.
You know, it's amazing. I come into office and I say, wow, look at how high these prices are. And the Democrats start screaming, affordability, affordability. They're the ones that caused the problem. I'll tell you one thing. They got one good line of that's one thing I'll say about it.
But if these polls are to be believed, then it's the voters who are calling BS. For months, they've been saying it's Trump's economy, and they don't like it. Instead of addressing tariffs, taxes, or rising prices, top Trump officials are echoing Trump and blaming Biden.
This is just more of the mess we inherited from the Biden administration.
The last administration moving cattle, doing everything they could to basically eviscerate the cattle industry.
To be really clear, yeah, fuel prices have gone up. This story was not written because of the Iran war. This story was written years ago because of what Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg.
We continue to give relief in other areas, cutting $6 trillion in regulation that the Biden administration put in place.
And joining me now is Jelani Cobb, Dean of the Columbia Journalism School and writer for The New Yorker magazine, and E.J. Dionne, Georgetown professor and New York Times opinion writer and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. It is great to have both of you guys with me tonight. Jelani, I'll start with you, though. I want to just begin with your basic reaction. I saw you out of the corner of my eye while I was ticking through some of those numbers. What strikes you the most here?
So, I mean, one of the things that strikes me about this is that, the word that hasn't popped up in this has been tariffs. That from the outset, when we started with the idea that the Biden economy, that Biden, his candidacy was weighted down before he stepped down, was weighted down by inflation. Kamala Harris inherited some of that when she became the nominee. And we move into a new administration, which is theoretically supposed to tackle that question. Instead, they pivot to tariffs, which further the difficulty people are having with being able to afford basic, food necessities and the like. And then we tack on a war on top of that, an optional war at that sends gas prices skyrocketing, and the ripple effect that has on all sorts of things, transportation, groceries that are being transported across the country, et cetera. We understand how these things are integrally connected in the economy. That is how we wind up here. It has nothing to do with being able to say, oh, this was the previous, 15 months ago, this was the previous administration. They own this. And this is, what you're seeing is basic avoidance there.
Yeah, and they have tried and tried again to pin everything on Biden. But the one thing I would add to what you just spelled out there is it's not even like he introduced tariffs and it made things that were bad already worse. Things were actually starting to turn around.
Sure.
There was really like the beginning of an uplift, numbers improving that he could have, frankly, capitalized, taken all the credit for.
Right.
And then he sort of torpedoed his own free gift from the Biden administration.
Yeah, but also I think the way in which the tariffs were imposed was wildly haphazard, really based upon retribution for who he liked or didn't like at the moment, imposed tariffs on allies, imposed tariffs on places that we have poor relationships with, and there was no kind of prevailing logic. And also, there's the counter tariffs that come as a result of this. And so we wind up in a trade war that is, again, completely optional. And none of that is part of the conversation. Nobody, Sean Duffy is not talking about that. When you talk about spirit, none of these things are coming up. That's not the conversation we're having. And it's interesting, but I don't think that voters are necessarily going to be that naive if the poll numbers are to be believed.
EJ, do you think that the voters can possibly buy any of this and buy that Democrats or Biden specifically is still to blame here? And I also want your thoughts just on that banner and what that may represent about the president's message right now, specifically going to retirees in Florida, golden age for your golden years at a time when so many people of every age range, they've been screaming about how this economy is not working for them.
I was really struck when you showed the clips of the Trump folks blaming Biden and all kinds of other Democrats. I'm surprised they didn't go back to John F. Kennedy, Harry Truman, or Franklin Roosevelt. It was all back there. And none of that is working. There was a very interesting poll that came out today from the Generation Lab, and it asked people, whom do you blame for the economy? 41% said Trump, another 9% said the Republican Congress. 3% said Joe Biden, and 3% said Democrats in Congress. Interestingly, a big whopping number, 31%, blame corporate greed. So what you have is a combination of blaming Trump, Republicans, and corporate greed, and nobody blaming the Democrats. This is Trump's economy now. And I think you really underscored something when you showed those golden years. I think one of the problems in this economy is you can have fabulous stock market numbers, which are particularly good for retirees who have money saved. But what you've got in the concentration of purchasing power is a lot of people at the top being able to spend a lot of money. Earlier this year, Moody's Analytics had a really powerful number that 20%, the top 20% of all earners accounted for 60% of consumer spending. That means everybody else has a much, much smaller share to spend, and they can't afford the housing that's on offer. They can't afford the cars that are on offer. My friend Harold Meyerson had a great piece today. There are only 4 cars left that cost $25,000 and under. Things are priced for people with the money to pay for them at the top of the economy. Yeah, there are quite a few people up there, but a lot of people at the bottom, and especially young people, aren't feeling it. And the frustration among the young at not being able to afford a house and entering a really difficult job market is enormous. And Trump has lost all the ground he gained among young people in the last election.
Can I add something to that?
Please.
EJ, the interesting point here as well is that, those people are not spending money on the same things. When you have all of that spending concentrated at the upper tier of the economy, they're buying luxury goods, they're buying second homes, they're buying, all those things. But when you talk about the things that really drive the economy, when you talk about, whether people are buying necessities and buying food stock and those kinds of things, that's where you wind up getting compression. People are not buying, people are not shopping in those areas that are vital for the well-being of the mom and pop shop, the small businesses, and all those things around that are really the lifeblood of many communities.
Jelani and EJ, you're both. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, EJ.
Oh, no, I think that's an extremely important point, and it really goes especially to communities that aren't that well off, that do count on that core consumer spending that you're talking about. Those left out places helped build Donald Trump's majority, and now those left out places still feel very left out.